Well, good morning, I guess, Christ Church Albany, or whenever you're watching this, or even if you're not part of Christ Church Albany, we welcome you. This is our first ever service, non-service. We have a pandemic going on, so we can't meet together. This is just so stinking weird. I just have never been a part of anything like this, and I'm sure all of us feel the same way because this is just kind of a new situation for all of us that we are trying to figure out together. But it's actually, I think, kind of a neat thing for us as Christ Church Albany because it really fits with a couple things that we've always said since we first started almost 7 years ago. We say almost every Sunday that church is not a building, even though I happen to be in an empty one right now. It's not an organization and it's not a service. Christ Church Albany is a group of people, and we regularly come together in this building since January, this new building that we get to be in at 181 Western. We all come together on Sunday morning, but this building is not the church. You who are watching this and those who are not watching this, you are the church. And it's the way in which you live, and it's the way in which we all follow Jesus that has the biggest ability to make a big impact. And the reason we come together is to help each other to be able to take next steps to follow Jesus, to love each other, and to love the world. And the good news is just because we're not able to come together this Sunday, and who knows what the future will bring, doesn't mean that we have to stop taking those next steps. And so wherever you are the church, and you have the ability today to take next steps to love Jesus, to love each other, and love the world. And if this little video can help out with that, then that's a cool thing. The other thing that we've often said since the beginning is that we've gone to organizations, we've gone to our city, we've gone to our schools, and we continually ask this question: how can we help? And usually that's meant that we can help by letting them borrow some of our speakers or our video screen or our bounce house. And that's been super fun ways that we've been able to help our city. And over the last few days, that has changed a little bit. And we have different ways that we are able to help our community. I've been putting out requests to lots of our different connections and networks and community leaders and re-asking that question: is there anything that we can do to help? And as we get answers to that, we will be letting you know. But what I'm so proud about of our church is I've been scanning my Facebook feeds and other social media. So many of you are already way ahead on this, and you are going out of your way to saying, is there anything I can do to help? Are there any of my neighbors that I can help? Are there any kids that were supposed to go to school next week and now they can't go to school? Any college students that were supposed to be going to class and now they can't go to class? Businesses that were expecting to have people buying their stuff that maybe aren't? You're already going out of your way to ask the question, how can you help? And I just can't wait to hear the stories of how our church is able to be the church and live these things out and really, really help. I wanted to talk a little bit about, so we were supposed to do a service on Sunday morning, and we're supposed to continue in this series called Believe. And I think God just kind of works things out some ways where what we were going to talk about has a lot to do with what is going on in our world right now. So we are in a series right now going through the book of John. And the idea in the book of John is John has these 7 different signs that he talks about. And he says that his belief in Jesus was built on these 7 signs. And so he didn't come in as like a full-blown believer. He came in, like a lot of us, with questions and with doubts. And it was in the process of seeing, it was in the process of hearing these different 7 signs that his belief in Jesus grew. And what we've said over the last few weeks is that what we believe really matters. And that's so true now. If you believe that Jesus is at all supernatural, then that's going to affect how you act. It's going to affect how you pray. It's going to affect how you see this pandemic that's going on right now. If you believe that Jesus is Lord, that he is King, if you believe that Jesus is in control, even when it seems like that the world is just kind of like spiraling out, that somehow God is still in control, then that's going to change how you act based off of how you believe. And if you believe that the things that Jesus said, if you believe that the way in which Jesus told us to live our lives is really the absolute best way to live, and that if we follow the teachings of Jesus, no matter what the circumstances are in our world, especially when it comes to how he teaches that we are to love people, when it teaches of how we are supposed to interact with other people, how we're supposed to sacrifice for the benefit of others, how we're supposed to be generous, ridiculously generous. If we believe that we are supposed to follow the teachings of Jesus, then I believe that that will have a profound impact on what we do in our world. So the story that we're supposed to look at in church on Sunday, and that I'll present to you now, is the fourth miracle, the fourth sign that Jesus did in this process. And it's a pretty big one. It's one of the only two miracles that is in all four of the Gospels. So there's four books in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that tell us the story of Jesus. We call them the Gospels. And they all kind of tell different parts because Jesus did a lot of things. And they all are kind of writing to different audiences, and different things about Jesus' ministry stuck out to all of them. But this is one of the two kind of big miracles that all four of them wrote about. The other one was the resurrection, so that's pretty big. We'll talk about that in a few weeks in Easter. Hopefully we'll be all together for that. And this one is a time where Jesus fed 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fish. And so you might have heard that story before. But it's in John chapter 6. And so if you have a Bible, you can follow along, or I'll read it to you. And I'm actually reading from a paper Bible today. So that's a little exciting. So here's the story from John chapter 6 as John records it. It says, sometime after this, so it's after a few of these other things that Jesus has done, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is also called the Sea of Tiberias. And so it kind of changed names because of an emperor named Tiberius. And so some people still knew it as the Sea of Galilee. Some people knew it as Tiberias, and just kind of what was going on. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. So stop there for a second. That's kind of a big deal that we've talked about throughout the series, is most people, really all people who followed Jesus in the first century, didn't do it by blind faith. They didn't do it just because the Bible said so. There wasn't even really a Bible written at that point. There was the Old Testament, there was the Jewish Bible, but there wasn't like this collection of things that we have today. They believed in Jesus because of things that they had seen. And the question is what did they believe? Did they believe that he was the Son of God? Some of them, maybe. Did they believe that he was the Messiah? Did they believe that he was totally supernatural and that he was going to rise from the dead someday? Probably not. They believed some things based off of what they had seen. And I think that's true of so many of us, is we all have different levels of faith in Jesus, and our faith, for the most part, that is solid is because of things that we have seen and experienced. Maybe we've tried prayer just a little bit, and it's through some prayers being answered, or like some experiences we had, or we were out on a hike one day, or we've just had some sort of like enough of an experience that it just feels like there's something out there. And we don't know, totally what it all is, but like we just through these experiences that we've had. Or some of us, it's an experience we've had of watching someone else. It's through watching a friend of ours, a family member of ours, and seeing their life be changed makes us believe a little bit. But our belief is based off of what we've seen and what we experienced. And we totally welcome that in our church. We don't want you to believe just because I say so, not just because the Bible says so. We want you to believe because you're putting these things into practice, and as you do, you see God starting to do things in your life. Belief is based off of experience. Belief is based off of things that we can see and that we can hear, and that God is actually really alive and moving in our world. And so all of them have this kind of different levels of belief. And when it says they saw the signs, it means they saw the signs that we've been talking about over the last couple weeks. So you can see kind of the pictures behind us that we've talked about the last couple weeks. And maybe it was Jesus turning the water into wine. Maybe it was Jesus healing the nobleman's son. Maybe it was the man by the pool we talked about last week that Jesus healed. Maybe it was another sign, because John says he didn't tell us every single thing that Jesus did. Maybe there were some other things that Jesus did that weren't in the book of John. But they'd seen Jesus do just enough things that it made them curious. It made them believe a little bit because of the signs that they had seen. The story goes on. It says, then Jesus went up to a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. And the Jewish Passover festival was near, so that's a big deal. And John regularly is going back to the Jewish Passover festival. And there's 3 different Passover festivals that that John talks about that Jesus went to. And the last one is super important. We're going to get to that in a few weeks. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, who was one of his disciples, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? This is, I think, almost kind of like a funny situation, because this was a conversation that they had not had at all. None of the disciples were thinking that it was their responsibility to feed these people. That wasn't on any of their minds whatsoever. And so now Jesus is asking them, like, hey, there's a whole bunch of people coming. I'll find out in a second. There was 5,000 men with the women and the kids that were there. Some people think it might have been up to 20,000 people. And so he's like, hey, what are we going to do to feed all of these people? And he asked Philip, because Philip was from that area, and so maybe Philip would know. And they're like, we have like no idea. And so I think that's kind of a little bit of what a lot of us feel in this crisis that we're in right now. I mean, if I came to you and said, hey, this coronavirus thing, COVID-19, this is like a pretty big deal. What are we going to do to solve it? What are you going to do to make this whole thing go away? Or some of the other symptoms that are going on because of this crisis. Hey, there's a big need for testing right now, and people aren't sure where we're going to get enough tests. So, hey, what are we going to do to make sure that everyone is going to get tested? What are you going to do to figure that out? Or the economic impact. I mean, that's huge. I've heard from a lot of our local businesses and local arts organizations and just so many people who are dependent on crowds coming together to be able to make their money. And a lot of people are really worried. And so if I said, hey, what are we going to do to help out all the arts institutions? What are we going to do to help out all the small businesses and restaurants? What are we going to do to kind of make all this? Or we have some school stuff going on. School in Albany is canceled for the next 2 weeks, and it sounds like there might be some plans of how kids can get food still, but man, I know a lot of parents are really trying to figure out, do we still have to go to work next week? What are our kids going to do? How are we going to figure all of this stuff out? And so if I said, hey, what are you going to do to make sure that all the kids in Albany school system are taken care of over the next little bit, to make sure they have a place to go, to make sure they have someone to take care of them, to make sure that they have food? You might have a response similar to what the disciples have, where you think, there might be a little bit of something that I could do for some people. I mean, I might be able to help some kids. I might be able to help some organizations. But if you're asking me to what are we going to do to figure out all of this stuff? I don't know. That is way too big. And that's kind of what goes on here. One, you kind of, Jesus is almost saying all this is like a test, a joke a little bit. He says he asked this only to test them, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. So Jesus, he's asking them this question, hey, what are you going to do? But he's smiling because he has a plan of what he's going to do, but these guys aren't quite sure yet. And so Philip answered him, it would take more than a half a year's wage to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. So here's the deal, Jesus. We can't help with this, and here's why we can't help, because it would take so much money. And I don't know if you've looked around at us, we all, a lot of us left our jobs to follow you. Before that, we were fishermen, and we didn't really have a lot of money. We don't have enough resources to be able to help with this. And then another one of his disciples, Andrew Simon, Peter's brother, spoke up. And he said, hey, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will these go among so many? And again, so we've looked, like, we have a little bit of resources, but it's like a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket of how we can actually help in this. Another thing I wanted to add to this, and this might be me reading into the text a little bit, so I apologize if that's what it is. But I wonder if there's a little bit of Philip here and of Simon and just the other disciples of kind of this idea of like, all right, well, what, we get that you like think we want us to help in this situation here, Jesus, and that's all nice and all, and you're good like that. But like, this isn't really our problem. Like, we actually, earlier in the text, if you read, you find out that they were trying to get away from the crowds. And so this crowd of people, 20,000 people, kind of found them. And they were, Jesus wasn't even like looking to have a gathering. And so these people all came out here. We didn't even ask them to come out here. We didn't tell them to not bring food. We didn't tell them that if they do come, we're going to give them food. Like, this isn't really our problem to solve. Like, what's the big deal here, Jesus? And I think that it could easily have that kind of a feel over the next few weeks. Is I think we're going to hear of a lot of different people that are struggling at different levels. And it would be easy for us to become very self-focused and to think about, hey, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my kids? What am I going to do about my work situation? What am I going to do about the things that I was going to do that I don't get to do anymore? And it would be easy to say, all these other problems that are going on, I feel bad for them, I have some empathy, but it's not really my problem. And what we want to be is we want to be a different kind of people. We want to be a kind of people who say, hey, a bunch of people who don't have enough food to eat, that's our problem. And we're going to do whatever we can to figure it out. And we're going to take the little bit of resources that we have to do whatever we can. So here's what happened. So these guys are not sure at all how they're going to fix this, and they think maybe it's even impossible to fix. But then here's what Jesus does. So Jesus said, hey, have the people sit down. And there was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there, and so lots more kids and women. Jesus then took the loaves, so these very few. I mean, these are like little bitty like baguette type. I mean, this isn't like loaves of bread. This is a very, very small amount of bread, very, very small amount of it might have been like a fish spread kind of a deal. And so this is like such a small amount of food this is like almost like laughable. I heard one person tell the story. This would be like if I went to the superintendent of our schools, Ms. Kawita Adams, and said, hey, I know you're trying to figure out how you're going to feed all these kids over the next little bit when they're not going to school. And so, hey, don't you worry about it. We as a church, we got together and we got you a bagel. We went to Price Chopper and we found one bagel, and so we figured you could just pass out this bagel to all the kids in the school and just kind of get it as small crumbs as you possibly can, and that should take care of it, right? It's like this is such an enormously small amount of food to be able to help in such a big issue. And so you could just see the disciples during this just being like, here he goes again. What are we doing? We don't have the money. We don't have enough food. We're having people sit down, and now they're starting to think hey, maybe they're gonna give us food. And we don't have the amount of, we don't have the resources it's gonna take to be able to do this. Jesus then took the loaves and gave thanks and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And so they just start passing out the food, and it multiplies, and they just have more and more and more. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, and let nothing be wasted, so that the pieces of the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who were eaten filled 12 baskets. And so Jesus does this amazing miracle, and he takes this little bit, this insignificant amount, not near enough to help in the situation. And Jesus does this amazing thing, and he multiplies it, and he makes it work. Now, first thing I want to address in this story is that for some of us, we just have such a hard time getting past like the supernatural part of this. Like, I mean, how in the world could this happen? And some people even have theories that, maybe it wasn't that, the food multiplied. Maybe that was everyone did have enough food, but no one was sharing. And so once they saw the little boy share his food, then everyone else shared their food. And maybe, but that's not what John says happened, and he was there. That's not what Matthew said happened, and he was there. That's not what Peter, who transcribed things to Mark, that's not what he said happened, and he was there. That's not what Luke, who thoroughly investigated all these things, said happened, and he was there. And what we see happen in the next part of the story, I'll read in a second, shows that it wasn't just that like everyone like got nice and shared all of a sudden, that something supernatural happened. The other reason is because I've heard reliable stories of things like this happening. We support a missions organization down in Guatemala, and they're in other parts of the world too, called Vision Trust. And a couple years ago, they had an issue, so they had a supplier that was supposed to give them fortified rice. And so they get the shipment of fortified rice in every week or so. And that rice was just crucial for the kids. I mean, that was what gave them their protein. That's what gave them the nutrition that they needed to survive. And they had an issue with the distributor, and so they weren't getting any more rice. And so they kind of kept just serving the kids the rice they had. And pretty soon they were down to just like, hey guys, we just have enough for tomorrow. We don't have, like, tomorrow's the last day. And so they went and they served up all the kids the rice that they had. And they're like, I guess that's it. But then all the kids came back the next day, and they went to where the rice was kept, and they had like just enough rice again for one more day. And so like, that's kind of weird. And so then they got the rice and they distributed it, and they're like, I guess that's it. And then the next day, all the kids came back again, and they went and looked at where the rice was, and there was just enough rice for that day. And for almost a week, a little more than a week, every day, the rice just kind of kept appearing and multiplying. And that's weird, and that's crazy. And it kind of goes against like my rational mind. But I believe the people that were there who said it happened. And I think that we have a God that is able to do those kind of things. The other thing that I think is cool about this story is that the disciples like went along with it even when they like thought the whole plan was crazy. So as Jesus having these people like sit down, and they start passing out this food, and the whole time they must be thinking like, this is insane. Like, we are gonna look ridiculous. Like, we're gonna pass out this stuff to like 3 people max, and then like it's gonna be done. But even though they thought it was like, they didn't understand it, they maybe had their doubts and their questions about how this whole thing was gonna work, they followed Jesus's instructions anyways. And that's one of the things that again and again we keep seeing in these stories in the book of John, is that Jesus gives us a part where we have to trust in his plan even when it doesn't make sense. So a few weeks ago we talked about that Jesus turned the water into wine, and these people had to fill up these water jugs full of water, and they just have no idea, like, how is this going to help? How is moving water from this container to this container going to do anything? And then Jesus did something amazing with it. Craig talked about the story of the nobleman's son, and Jesus told him, hey, don't worry, it's going to be okay. Go ahead and just take my word and start walking home. And he had nothing that he saw had actually changed, but he just trusted in what God said. Last week, we talked about the man at the pool, and Jesus told him to get up and walk and take his mat, and he had to follow these instructions. And I think for a lot of us over the next few weeks, I think God might want to do something through us, and he might want to take some of our small actions and do something amazing, but we have to trust. And so God might put something in your mind, some small thing that you can do. Maybe it's 1, 2, 3 neighbors that God puts in your mind that you think you have the ability to help. Maybe it's 1 or 2 people that you know are like going to be way quarantined over the next little bit, and they're going to be pretty lonely, and they're living by themselves, and God puts it on your heart to do something for them. Maybe it's 1 or 2 organizations that you want to give some money to, or you want to give some supplies to. Maybe it's something else that this kind of God has put on your heart. And you need to like trust to take the action. And who knows what God might do with that small thing you do. If you trust God to do the next right thing, how God might multiply that, and how God might use our what seems like insignificant amount of ability, insignificant amount of money, insignificant amount of time, just because you feel like you can't like fix it all. Don't do nothing. Do something. And who knows what God will do with that something. Have the trust to say, hey, we gave out all the rice yesterday. Why even go check to see if there's more rice? Because maybe God will do something through our trust and through our faith, even if it's limited, even if we have doubts and questions along the way. And then here's how the story ends, and it kind of gets a little bit, I think, strange at the end. So everyone is eating all this stuff, and it says, after the people saw the sign that Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who has come into the world. That's why I think something supernatural happened, because it wasn't just like, oh, wow, this guy told everyone to share, and now they shared. They were like, whoa, based off of what I just saw, I think this guy legitimately might be the prophet. I think he legitimately might be the Messiah. He might legitimately be who he keeps claiming to be. And that was a pretty big deal. And you'd think that Jesus would lean into that and be like, yes, I am the guy. And let's, all, kind of like jump into that. But instead, Jesus does something a little bit different. It says, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So their belief all increases. They all think, wow, we think that this Jesus guy really might be able to do some pretty amazing stuff afterwards. And that puts an idea in their head of, we should make this guy king. And what we know by reading other parts of the New Testament is that they had a very specific idea of kind of this whole king Messiah thing. And they were kind of waiting for a king. They were waiting on a Messiah. And they're like, man, when a king and when a Messiah comes, then he's going to do what I want him to do. And what I want him to do is, we're this kind of like persecuted Jewish group right now under the thumb of the empire, of the Roman Empire. And so when the Messiah comes, we're going to rally an army and we're going to march into Jerusalem and we're going to kick butt over the Romans and we're going to reestablish this kingdom and we're going to be powerful and we're going to have all the money and we're going to have all the resources and we're going to have everything that we need, and the king is going to make that happen. And I think it's so easy sometimes that when our faith starts to increase in Jesus, we say, okay, I'll believe in this Jesus guy, but I believe in Jesus because I think that he will be able to do what I want him to do. I think he'll be able to make my agenda happen. Two of the words that we'll talk about sometimes around here in church is the words blessed and salvation. What does it mean for Jesus to save you? What does it mean for Jesus to bless you? And over again, it seems that Jesus' definitions are different than ours. Because if I think, man, Jesus would bless me, then Jesus would give me like the truck I've been wanting for. He would give me a lake house with a great boat. He would make my family well. He would make this coronavirus thing go away. He would make all my friends that are owning businesses, their businesses would just be flush with customers. He would make everything work out the way that I wanted to. And I think it'd be easy in the next little bit for us to make all of our prayers saying, God, if you are who you say you are, then you would just make all of these things go away. You would do the things that I want you to do. But I think Jesus is smarter than that, and he knows better. Because what Jesus knows is that deep down inside, our biggest problems are not just what we see in front of us. Right now, if the coronavirus went away, vanished, be good. If all of a sudden all the restaurants were full of people, if all the people who are isolated, could now come together in groups again, if all the schools were reopened, if we all of a sudden I could watch March Madness again, and if my IndyCar race wasn't canceled, which is a big bummer, by the way, if everything was kind of back the way that it was just a few weeks ago, a few months ago, would things really be that much better? Because I remember what it was like a few weeks ago, and I bet you do too. Just a little bit ago, before we'd ever heard of this virus before all these issues were facing us, I still knew a lot of people that were talking about fears that they had, anxieties that they had, worries that they had. We were still struggling with lots of different things. Because what we need most is not just our life to work out great. And so over and over again, when you read the Bible, you don't see a lot of people who they started following Jesus and then their life went perfect as we would define perfect. Actually, a lot of times, you find that the people that are closest to the will of God end up in some really difficult situations. They find themselves in lions' dens. They find themselves shipwrecked. They find themselves poor and in jail and just kind of on the run. And they find themselves in really difficult circumstances. Jesus himself, who obviously I think God loved and blessed, in just a few months after this story, he would go into Jerusalem as a king. But it wasn't for a coronation like what they were expecting to happen here. It was so that he could be crucified, so that he could go to a cross. Because he knew that what we need most is not just our problem solved, is we need something changed on the inside. So if you skip ahead in the story a little bit, there's a story about Jesus walking on water next, which is a super cool story, and we're going to talk about that next week, maybe via the internet or maybe via live. We'll see how the next week goes. But that's a whole kind of crazy story too, because Jesus sends his disciples into a lake and he sends them into a storm. And so there's ever this idea that if I follow Jesus, he's just going to make my life work out great. Jesus sent a group of his disciples on purpose into a storm, which is something to think about. But after that, Jesus arrives at the other side of the lake because he's trying to get away from everybody because they're trying to make him king. Then everyone found him. So now we're in verse 25 of chapter 6. It says, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? And Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. And then Jesus kind of goes into this whole description of him being the bread of life. And if you really want to have life, then you need to literally internalize him. You need to eat his flesh. You need to drink his blood, which is kind of a crazy metaphor for our world today. But it's the idea that you need to put Jesus as close to you on the inside. And what Jesus is saying is that the best thing that any of us can ever have happen to our lives is not just for our stomachs to be filled with food, although that would be great. Not just for our families to be made safe from viruses. Not just for our businesses and our finances to flourish. Not just for us to have the entertainment options that are all being shut down on that we can't go to. That the biggest thing that can happen to us for our life is for Jesus to get into the inside of our lives. For you to be able to have an intimate friendship with Jesus. For you to be able to trust Jesus, that whatever he tells you to do, even if it leads into a storm, even if it doesn't make sense, that Jesus is just with you, and you can have that kind of hope, and you can have that kind of peace. And I think that's a real gift over the next few weeks too, because a lot of us are trying to figure out how real is this whole Jesus thing, and what would it really look like for me to spend time with him? And if I did spend time with him, how much would that really change me from the inside out? And a lot of us have had these ideas of all right, so maybe I should try this prayer thing. Maybe I should try this Bible reading thing. Maybe I should try to just be silent. And we just feel like we just don't have enough time. Well, guess what? For the next few days, weeks, who knows how long, you are going to have some extra time. You're going to have some extra time where you could be by yourself, maybe. You're going to have some extra time where you can be with your family and loved ones. And I really encourage you to take advantage of that time. Take advantage to worship on your own and sing some songs. Take advantage of some time to be able to pray. Pray for your neighbors. Pray for our city officials that are trying to make these really difficult decisions. Pray that if God has given you any resources at all, even if they feel insignificant, if God has given you any extra time, even if it doesn't feel like very much, how can God use that? And as you start to experience God in your life, I believe that you will start to feel something multiply inside of you. And as you do the next right thing, you will see that God might take that thing that you do and multiply it in amazing ways. And last thing I wanted to say for today is, as we go through all of this, don't feel like just because we can't come together in this building, or maybe we can't come together in coffee shops or whatever else the same that we would have just a little bit ago. Don't feel like you need to do this alone. Text messaging is a pretty cool thing. Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and whatever other kind of social media things you have. Pick up a phone and call somebody. If you need help, ask for help. If you have the ability to help, reach out and ask for help. If you just need to connect with someone, if you're just bored, if you're home with your kids and they're driving you crazy, reach out to other people and let's keep being a community together who trust in God, learning to trust more in God, learning more to love and to trust each other, and learning more how to take the things that God has given us to make a big impact in the world around us. We love you, and I can't wait till we can all be here together in person again soon. Blessings. Love you guys. Bye.